How would you like to instantly teleport back to your home base from anywhere on your Minecraft world? Or have as many teleportation stations as you want to go anywhere from any sticky situation? Or have an AFK Protection Teleporter that will send your player to a secure location wirelessly within 2 seconds of when a nearby sound is detected? Well, stay tuned and buckle in, because this is Minecraft for the people. What's up people, I'm Potato Noir coming at you with another video in my Minecraft for the People series. Today we're going to be looking at a new and improved version of my original Catporter teleportation machine, plus a few extra applications and surprises. So first, right here we have my original design, which I'm calling the Catporter Mark I. So if you don't remember, this design works by giving an output to this trapdoor over here whenever this cat sits and unsits within a certain amount of time. And that amount of time is determined by the amount of items in this hopper right here. And basically what this does is that whenever you log out, your cat will sit down from anywhere in the world if these chunks are loaded. And it's basically a way of making wireless redstone over long distances. Also, just to get this out of the way now, none of these designs will actually work in single player because whenever you log out, anything that isn't part of spawn chunks will immediately stop upon logging out because it's single player and your game isn't loaded. But most of the time, this thing won't be super practical for use on single player unless you build it in spawn chunks. And one more thing to note, these are just representations of where inner pearl stasis chambers would go, so it actually would go deeper than this and have soul sand at the bottom. So one of the ways you can actually improve this is by putting a non-air block directly above in the cat space or above the chest. What this does is it actually prevents the cat AI from wanting to sit down randomly, but actually these chests don't have to be trap chests, they can just be normal chests. And the cat will not sit down if you put the torch right here, or in this case if you have a slab you can also put the cat on top of the slab and you'll still get a comparative output. So there's actually one pretty fatal flaw in this original design. It still works a majority of the time, but what can happen eventually, and I mentioned this in the video, is that occasionally whenever you reload all these chunks, this cat can teleport out of the area that it is currently in even though it has a lead on it. And what it'll look like is it just teleports to you and has the little lead broken right next to it. Just every now and then this would happen, which would be really annoying. So I looked out for some better solutions and to see how to fix this. But before I speak about those, I want to give a shout out to this really awesome design by Mooncatcher, who actually reached out to me and showed me this tileable version of the original that they made, which is really incredible and has some really cool redstone in it. It works exactly the same way. Basically, if the cat sits down and stands up within a certain amount of time, you'll get a redstone output from here. It just works a little bit differently, but it's actually very nice redstone involved here, so thanks Mooncatcher. So you can still use this if you don't mind the cat teleporting every now and then, but I'll show you the solutions that I've got to this cat lead breaking here in a second. So what we have here, if you can see the difference between these two setups, is a little thing called a player online detector. And this is by a YouTuber named 2no2name. So big shout out to 2no2name. This is not my design. This is 100% their creation. And I've got to say, even after watching the video, I don't think I could have come up with this because the way he explains it is that it uses precise timing that lines up with the cat AI. It has to be exactly in this configuration in order to work, but it works incredibly well. So big shout out to 2no2name, and I believe 2no2name was actually the person who discovered just player online detection systems in the first place. Yeah, big shout out there. Also, thanks to Zimmer Golem for actually letting me know about this design in the first place. So if you've already built the first version of my Catporter and you don't really want to change anything and have the most simple way to upgrade, then you can just replace the blocks as shown here on the left, and you can see the comparison here. So you just have to add this one comparator and a few of these observers in the minecart. I'll show you how to do that later on in the video. So this chest actually does not have to be a trap chest. I was actually mistaken about that. I forget which video I got that information from, but this chest actually does not have to be a trap chest. If you're upgrading from the old version to the new version, you have to remove this hopper here. Otherwise, whenever you reload these chunks, it can actually mess up the signal that is going into here. So yeah, make sure that you remove the hopper if you're upgrading to this new improved version, and it will work properly. And this piston actually has to be running the whole time, which is how this contraption works, which if you can see the hitboxes here, you'll see that the cat is kind of being pushed up and pulled down back onto the chest. So when the cat is being continually pushed up like this, the timing is very precise with its AI so that it will actually activate this signal here, and this observer needs to be facing into this comparator. I learned that the hard way. It is very crucial to this design. So one of the things that is kind of frustrating about this is that whenever you log out and the cat sits down because you log out, it looks different from what actually is being outputted here now. Whenever the cat is currently sitting, that I have sat them, it'll sit down every time it's squooshed down onto this chest right here. So it'll kind of be like sitting, standing, sitting, standing over and over again. And that's what this design basically is for that precise timing of the cat standing, and makes this work. But you can keep the rest of the design the same, but I have some serious improvements here to show you later on. So right here we have the Mooncatcher design that has actually been upgraded with the player online detector from 2 Notes You Name. But one of the only drawbacks about this design is that it's very difficult to make the timings precise and also be tileable, unfortunately. So you don't have to quite make this as complicated because of that. But if you'd like to have a design that's pretty compact, if you like it that way, you have the materials, go ahead and feel free to build this. It'll still work just as well. Believe it or not, all these designs right here are only scratching the surface of the potential of what you could do with this machine. So when I finished the first design, I started asking myself some interesting questions about what the applications of this machine could be. So if you want to have multiple stops on this machine, there's a few ways you could actually go about it. In Cubic Meter's video, he has it set essentially to a T flip-flop at the end of this, which, if you don't know what that means exactly, it basically means that every other time you would log out and log back in, you would get an output from the back of one of these machines instead of every single time. And what he was using that to do was essentially travel between 2 locations on his world. But however, I don't particularly like this system because it limits you to where you can go, specifically one place. So to me, that's not quite the ideal application of this. Certainly it is very useful to have 2 stops, but what if we could do more? But without any farther ado, I present to you the multiple stop Catporter Mark II stations variant. This build you see right here can be used for the 2nd stop, 3rd stop, 4th stop, on and on and on until you have as many as you'd like. Sometimes you just kind of get in the flow and you come up with a design that is way better than you initially thought you were able to make. But the way this works is basically these 2 hopper chains simulate the first window and the 2nd window for whenever you want your player to be logging online. Okay, this is getting confusing. So imagine we have that first window of the original machine that I showed you there. What this machine does is represents that first window by this hopper chain right here, and on this machine, the 2nd window is the one that activates the login sequence. So if we start the clock, initially when the cat sits down, this represents the first window that you can log out and log back in. So you can have another machine like I showed over there, or I'll show a simpler one in a second, and this will stay active for 10 seconds, whereupon the 2nd window has now activated. And now if we unsit the cat within this 2nd window, we'll get the output to the chest. And I'll wait a few seconds for this to fill back up. It has about another 10-second cooldown before it can be used again. But once you do that, I'll show you that if you sit the cat down and unsit it before that 10-second window, you don't get an output. And if you sit the cat down and wait until at the very end, you also will not get an output from this as well. So we're waiting, and alright, so the piston has extended, and in a few seconds, once this hopper clears out, the comparator will be empty, which will give it signal down in and pick this up, and now it will remain in a stable state until you log back in, whereupon the cat will stand up and it will go back into the original configuration. One thing to note, it doesn't matter if the observer is here or right here in the starting configuration, it'll work perfectly fine both ways. But after I made this for multiple stops, I figured you could actually tweak it down a little bit just for one. So over here we have the 1 station variant of this new design, and this is actually just a hair cheaper than this tileable version right here. And since it's taking up the same amount of space that it would in these 2 blocks, you might as well use those as well, because so far I have not figured out how to make a tileable version of this design. Additionally, I like building it this way just for consistency, because that way you'll be familiar with building a design and you can just translate it to these ones that have a few more stops if you'd like, and so that's really nice there. And you can change the timings on all of these, but I found that Using 25 items as almost exactly 10 seconds helps to keep my head clear and the math easy, because you don't have to, divide by 7 or divide by, I guess 5 would be pretty easy to work with as well, but it can also be a little bit difficult to relog in a 5-second window because it's be a little bit shorter. So you can play around and see what you're comfortable with, what you can consistently hit. Worst case scenario, you hit a different teleporter than the one that you like. If that happens, you can literally just pearl it and then go back and go to where you like. Another really cool thing about this design is that you don't have to build more hoppers for more stations. What you can do is you can actually, instead of 25 items right here, you could put 50, which would simulate, if you had one of these built somewhere as stop number 2, you could put 50 in here as stop number 3, which would give a 20-second time before the window would start. So after 20 seconds, you'd have your 10-second window instead of after 10 seconds. Another limiting factor would be how many nether portal chunk loaders that you'd have running in your world. So depending on how beefy your server is or how friendly you are with the admins, I think the real limiting factor would be how many chunk loaders you'd have, because for each of these that you have in your world, the chunks actually have to be loaded. So the one at spawn chunks, if you had one there, it wouldn't require any of this, but if you had any elsewhere, you would definitely need a chunk loader for all of those. So that is something to consider. And right here, I have a demonstration of what this would look like in if you wanted to have some sort of teleportation hall for the multi-stop system. So around back, we have the outputs running into these 2 teleportation chambers here. These work exactly the same way with a little trapdoor. Your Ender Pearl Stasis chamber would be right in here, but I mentioned this because you can't exactly mirror it on either side of the observer, as cool and symmetrical as that would be. It actually, if you wanted these doors right next to each other, it wouldn't work, because this door would actually be in this block instead. It would be 1-2 blocks over here, that would be the center, and then you'd have the door in the same block as this one, which wouldn't work. So if you do want to have these, because I think they look really cool, you'd actually have to build it like this, but there's still room for others exactly 3 blocks apart on this side as well. So before I get into the chunk loaders and some of my failed designs for a later concept, I actually want to give a really big shout out to B-Run's Daylight Detector Teleporter, because this is a design that if you've ever tried to make something like this, you'll really appreciate just how fantastic the redstone is on this. The video for this doesn't have very many views, so go over there and give this man some views for this fantastic redstone. So there's a lot of really cheap designs of this on YouTube right now that aren't very good, but this is actually much nicer, because what this will do is basically, if you don't sleep throughout the entire night, you won't be teleported back. So at the very beginning of the night and the very end of the night, which you can see by these times here, if you're familiar with how the time system in Minecraft works, you can actually sleep without teleporting, but for most of the night you can sleep to teleport. So this is a really good early game system that basically can recall you back to your base whenever you'd like. You could turn this into a 2-way, but you'd need a chunk loader and that would make it much more complicated, and this is a really beautiful design, so just build it in spawn chunks at the beginning of the game. Don't try and do anything too much with this. So right here I have the very simplistic demonstration of Ilmango's 1.19 chunk loader, and you can see the video link for this in the description. But what I'm doing right here is I'm actually simulating the nether side in red and the overworld side in this clear glass, and this actually just kind of shows you how these chunk loaders are actually working across the dimensions. It helps me visualize it a little bit, so hopefully it'll help somebody out there. But basically you just have an item being dispensed through the portal, and it'll travel across dimensions, load the other side and those chunks right around the portal, and then it'll actually go through in this cycle and keep repeating that. Important things to note: if you don't know exactly the area that this loads, it loads just a few chunks around the chunk. Basically, all you need to know about this chunks is that if this obsidian block represents the chunk that the chunk loader is in, this 3x3 ring of blocks around it represents the chunks that everything functions exactly like it would if the player is on and loading the chunks. So you can build anything and it will work perfectly. And this yellow ring around here and the 5x5 represents the chunks that entities won't work in. So if you didn't know, an ender pearl is actually an entity. Basically, all you need to know is build a Catporter in one of these chunks directly adjacent to the nether portal, or in this chunk right here, and it will definitely work. So if you'd like to have this simplistic chunk loader, but also want the functionality of being able to travel through the dimensions, so this is a little design I came up with. It's not really unique, but it's just kind of extending Ilmango's chunk loader to where like this. And what it does is makes the items, whenever they travel through, they're on the very edge here. So when you go through the middle, there's no chance of actually picking them up. So right here you see the Nether counterpart for this, and it works exactly the same way with exactly the same things behind it. So it's very, very easy. And so here in the Nether, all the same versions that I was just talking about will also work, with one slight caveat in that you have to have a different stasis chamber, because obviously water does not work in the Nether. So a big shout out to this video that you'll see on the screen right here. And so what this is a Nether stasis chamber that uses honey blocks, and I'll go ahead and show you how that works here. So the way this works is you'll go into the stasis chamber here, and you'll approach the edge of the honey block, and right in between this pixel and the center of this pixel, you'll go ahead and toss a ender pearl. It's kind of hard to get exactly on the right area. So you'll toss an ender pearl, and what this do, if you're lucky, it will be a stable throw. If you're not, you'll have to do it a few more times like I just had to do. And the way this works is it actually keeps the pearl exactly in between the solid part of this honey block and the outside part where it would fall on the piston. And so this keeps it in a suspended animation here. And if a throw lasts more than 10 or 20 seconds or so, it's usually very stable, but due to the small variation of travel of the ender pearls, which travel in a little cone shape even from exactly the same position, there'll be a little bit of variation on each throw. So you might go through a handful of ender pearls each time you do this, so just be aware of that. But it is stable if you do get a stable throw that lasts a little while. So the way this works is that it actually uses the pulse to stop this piston and extend it permanently for a little small amount of time. So it would want to be on full delay for this repeater right here. And this lever is just optional to manually stop this piston from firing if you don't want the sound for some reason. And everything else is exactly the same. You want to make sure that this piston's going continually while you do it. And I'll go ahead and simulate it by going to the overworld real quick and back in a certain amount of time, which should be 10 seconds for that one if I believe I am correct there. Bam. See? And we got teleported. So it works exactly the same way, just on the other side. And you can log out and log back in, and the cat will still sit down as normal in the Nether as long as it's been loaded. So remember, this will work for all the other designs I showed you before. As long as you have this player online detection system, this cat won't get teleported. It'll work exactly the same way. And last but not least, I'd like to show you one of the coolest spin-offs of this design, which is actually an AFK Protection Teleporter. So this is the design that I came up with this, and the way this works is it actually takes advantage of the fact that cats will sit down whenever the player crosses dimensions. So you have a separate chunk loader of where your stasis chamber will be, and right here you'll have where you're AFKing in the overworld, either at a farm or where have you. And so the way this works is, I'll turn on hitboxes. This player is actually being kept in a state of suspended animation in the swirly part of the Nether portal. And what this timer is doing is actually pulling the player out of the portal just long enough to where they won't be teleported, but to where they can teleport through sooner if a vibration is detected, which is what this calibrated sculpt sensor is here for. This will actually give a little bit bigger range, and you can configure this however you'd like for whatever noises, if you have a particular noise. But if you have one just like this, it'll detect anything, which is really good. And down here we have the simplistic repeater timer, which is just deactivating this torch, which is in turn powering the piston, moving the honey block, which the player is standing on, and which will actually move the player instead of just moving from out from underneath them. The leaves next to this are just so that the honey block won't affect them. Any non-movable block by slime or honey will work. The way this works is just at the end, when you place this last block over the observer to make the floor look like a normal floor, it'll send the pulse down and start the timer and go into this system here. So whenever a vibration is detected, which you can see by this, the player will actually be sent through the Nether portal shortly, and then no other players will be able to follow them. And immediately after that player is sent through the portal, the cat will sit down on the other side, which will activate the Nether side stasis teleporter with its own separate chunk loader somewhere else, which will then teleport the player immediately from the Nether side, meaning that even if I go in right after them, I wouldn't be able to see them if this player had a pearl somewhere else. And a machine like this, for example. This one's just a carpet bot though, so I didn't actually go through the trouble to give him his own teleporter, but if this was a normal player and you had set this up correctly, he would be teleported as soon as he hit the other side right here. And you can see that there's not really very much redstone on top. We have two droppers facing into each other for the simplistic timer and an item inside. And you have a little bit of wool in between where the player is. You can barely see it right here. So all you need is one wool block right here. And that actually blocks the sounds of the player stepping on the honey to where it won't activate this. And right here you have a Kickstarter mechanism to make the machine start up again. And the wool block presents the button sound from getting down there as well, so that one's necessary. You can have this whatever color of wool you'd like to blend into the environment. Just one block probably won't be too suspicious for this. So this machine is actually very foolproof, but perhaps not impossible to be killed in. So something that might set it off is maybe if you have a TNT exploding just before the player goes through, or if you could somehow break this nether portal very quickly. But like I said, if you're just stumbling across this, there's almost zero chance that you'd be able to kill the player before any of this happens. Maybe a stray arrow would do the trick. So if I were you, I would also build a box directly around where the player is standing, just so that any other projectile would have to come in and actually hit that or break the block, and so then that would send the player through, which would be safe. Additionally, if you did build a box and maybe some TNT lands right on the top as it's about to explode, that could potentially break the nether portal. So, I mean, there's ways to get around it if you want to spend more time, but this is pretty safe for almost all scenarios, especially if you have a little box on the inside to protect from projectiles. So the machine on the nether side that you'll need for this design to work is actually very similar, but with a T flip-flop right here. So we have a dropper facing into on top of a hopper that is leading into another dropper that leads up, and a little comparator output here. And this is a very compact T flip-flop to where when the cat sits down, nothing will happen. The cat stands up again, you'll get an output. This is basically a way of being able to go to the overworld without triggering the system yet. So what you want to do is you want to make sure the item is in the bottom dropper here and that the cat is standing whenever you start this machine. And what that'll do is whenever you get your ender pearl in here, that'll mean that whenever you go to the overworld, the cat will sit down, but you won't get an input to this T flip-flop until the cat stands back up again. Meaning when your player has gone through the portal by where he is AFKing, he'll come into the nether. The cat will once again stand up, which will activate this T flip-flop right here, and will lock up this piston and teleport the player to the secure location. So this machine, you want to build it in a secure location, preferably right by bedrock or way above the bedrock ceiling, whichever one's more hidden. And this will allow you to instantly teleport away from whoever is wanting to attack you to a much more secure location. If you wanted to, you could even chain some of these together with way more complicated systems, as in once the player is teleported here, push him through another portal that sends back to the overworld, which will then teleport them somewhere else in the overworld, which would just be almost Inception levels of complication. So do with that what you'd like. There's definitely room for more complex designs and interdimensional AFK teleporting here. So yeah, that's something to explore if you want to. And I will go ahead and mention these older versions that you see right here are from an older version of design where I thought that this was only stable on the overworld side for the cat sitting down. So I'd made a system where the cat would sit down in the overworld and it would send another item activating the nether side that way, but it's actually not needed and is way too clunky, and I just didn't understand the player online detection system right. So this design is actually all you need, and it's much better. Just make sure that you have your separate chunk loader such as this right next to it within a few chunks so that it'll go ahead and load. So now that I've walked you through all the designs, I'll go ahead and show you a few tutorials for what I think are the most important things that you should learn how to build here. To start building the Catporter Mk II without stations, start by where you want your trapdoor to be. Next, place a repeater and an observer facing away from the repeater as shown here. Next, place a few more blocks with some redstone and a sticky piston facing towards that observer, and follow the rest of the block placement here. Next, directly under this last block, you want to place a sticky piston going down, and then on top you want to go ahead and place a comparator, observer facing into it, and also 2 hoppers facing into each other. You can place composers on top if you want to eliminate a little bit of lag, and a redstone torch underneath the far side, with 2 more comparators and a chest out front. Next, place a normal piston facing up next to it and another block on its far side, an observer facing away from the last comparator, and then 2 observers facing into each other right here. Before we put this last block in, we're going to go ahead and get the cat in place, and the way we do that is by putting rails on top of this section right here. Next, get your cat onto the track and push a minecart into it to pick it up, and then go ahead and delete all these rails when it's right here and this extra block. Now make sure to place a trapdoor on the bottom part of the block directly above the chest as shown here. Make sure that the hitbox of the cat looks like this photo and is on both the piston and the chest. Now you can go ahead and add the block and the lever to turn the system off. After this, go ahead and put as many items in the hoppers that you feel like. It'd be 25 items for 10 seconds or 16 items for 7 seconds. Also put 1 item in this chest. Now if the cat is standing, your machine should be ready to use, and you'll get an output if you log out and log in within your desired time window. Don't forget the stasis chamber at the end too. So for the stations variant, it's literally exactly the same as what I just showed you, except for there's these 2 blocks and these 2 hoppers and this comparator and torch right in between this section right here and these 2 sections with the 2 comparators right down there. To build the AFK Protection Teleporter, start with where you'd like your nether portal to be on ground level. Then go ahead and fill up the back with obsidian to give a little bit extra protection. Then go back around to the front and add the 1 honey block and the 2 non-movable blocks. The glass here is just representing what the natural floor would be, so you don't actually have to put that. But place 1 wool exactly right here, place a button on top, and underneath place 2 droppers facing directly into each other. Place another wool behind the leftmost dropper, and then add a block and a comparator facing out of the rightmost dropper. Now go ahead and place a sticky piston as shown right here, facing towards the honey block, and down underneath you're going to want to go ahead and put 1 item in the leftmost dropper. Next, place some blocks under the piston as shown here, and a redstone torch on one of them, and below that place blocks in this pattern right here to make room for the clock timer. So go ahead and place 5 repeaters on full delay in the direction as shown here, and go ahead and place 4 more blocks of redstone dust. Now we can go ahead and add our calibrated skulk sensor directly underneath this dropper, and then we'll go back around to the other side and place an observer facing up, and then once you have that, you can go ahead and fill in all the blocks for the ground level, and that will start the timer for the honey block, which will not activate until you reset the button on the other side. So now I'd recommend adding 1 more layer of protection in some sort of box around where the player is, so you can do this how you'd like. Just make sure not to forget the roof like I did. So getting in the optimal position of this is a little tricky. It takes a little bit of practice, but isn't too bad. So what you want to do is you want to take in mind where your hitbox is. And so if you go ahead and get on the honey block, you'll notice I get pushed, but not directly into the portal itself. So the best way to get into position to where it takes the least amount of time to get you through the portal is scoot over while this honey block goes back, and then go back to where you're barely on top of the honey block. This takes a little bit of practice, so I would recommend doing this a few times just so that you don't get accidentally teleported. But as you can see, if I go into free cam here, and if I turn on hitboxes, you can see that my hitbox is just on the edge of the nether portal here. It's actually on both the honey block and the nether portal. And funny story is that even if you press F1 during this, the purple goes away, but you still get all the swirly disco effects. So I guess there might be an application for that somewhere, but I think it's really funny. So yeah, that's how you actually get set up in this and be ready to AFK. So yeah, that's about all the designs I had for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you all so much for supporting my first video. This definitely was inspired by all the support that you guys showed and all the cool ideas that y'all brought to the table and made me aware of things I wasn't. So thanks to all you guys for commenting, and tell me what you like or don't like about these designs so that maybe in the future we can improve this even more. But that's all I have for you today, so let's hit that outro.